Have you ever experienced something like this? You're walking down the street, and someone comes walking toward you looking a little different from anyone you usually see. Your heart does a quick double take, and a single label pops into your head: freak, or maybe weirdo. You quicken your pace, brush past them, and think to yourself, man, it takes all kinds to make a world. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, how exactly are you judging whether someone is abnormal? Is it just because they're wearing a skirt, because the way they talk feels off, or is it purely based on that split-second gut feeling? As it turns out, the answer is a lot more complicated than you might think. Today's episode starts with a pretty hilarious little mix-up on the street. It's a story about a guy trying to ask for directions, but because he keeps using the wrong terms of address, it triggers a chain reaction of awkward, laugh-out-loud misunderstandings. Yet beneath the comedy of this story lies a much deeper question. What does it actually mean to be abnormal? Welcome to today's episode. I'm your host. Excuse me, miss. Could I ask for... I'm not a miss. Oh, sorry, ma'am. Just trying to find... Who are you calling ma'am? Lady, please. Who are you calling a lady? Buddy, listen. Don't buddy me. You and your whole family can buddy off. Ma'am, please calm down. I just need directions. How am I supposed to calm down? I'm a dude. If you saw a guy walking down the street looking like that, all dolled up in fishnets, a long skirt, and heavy makeup, you'd probably look down your nose at him and think, what a freak. Or, if you're strolling across a beautiful college campus, a luxury car suddenly pulls up, the door swings open, and a completely naked guy sits there giving you a sleazy grin. Something that actually happens on college campuses more often than you'd think. You'd cover your eyes, run away, and scream, pervert. You might even look at a friend who genuinely enjoys watching ultra-gory movies or treats animals poorly and think they're totally twisted. On the surface, spotting a freak seems that simple. In psychology, the branch that studies these patterns of thought in ordinary people is called abnormal psychology. But here, abnormal is simply defined relative to a person's own normal. Most people think they can spot the difference between a normal person and a deviate at a single glance. But once you dive deeper into psychiatry and psychology, you realize that even top-tier clinical psychologists can't always spot a troubled mind just through casual observation or conversation. Some people bury their darkest impulses so deep that they appear more functional and regular than the rest of us. Meanwhile, others who seem completely bizarre end up using their eccentricities and creative drives to achieve extraordinary things. It's exactly what people mean when they say genius and madness are two sides of the same coin. Take the Hollywood comedy The Hangover, for example. It was a massive, light-hearted blockbuster. One of the main characters, the brother-in-law, is someone anyone would consider unstable. He wears jock straps, secretly drugs his friends with psychedelics, and demands a blood brother pact over drinks. Yet, it's this exact weirdo who ends up leading the group to crush it in Las Vegas, winning the $80,000 they desperately need. And don't think this only happens in the movies. Bill Gates, the world's richest man, has long been a symbol of wealth and genius, treated like a living legend. Yet many who worked with him early on described him as intensely awkward, mechanical, and painfully blunt. Steve Jobs, the genius who shaped an entire era, was notorious for throwing historic tantrums. He was a raging perfectionist. John Nash, the Nobel Prize-winning pioneer of game theory, suffered from severe schizophrenia. These geniuses weren't blind to their psychological flaws, but they managed to master them and achieve greatness. By contrast, the people we call madmen, creeps, or psychos, the ones who are deceived, controlled, and ultimately defeated by their psychological flaws, are, in a sense, the vulnerable ones. The hidden face of the subconscious. There's a case file from a counseling clinic about a woman whose identical twin sister died in a tragic accident. The sisters had been incredibly close. Shattered by grief, the surviving sister fell ill with sorrow. Soon she began dreaming of her twin every single night, holding long conversations with her. The next morning, the details of what they said would be hazy and elusive. Eventually, it escalated. She even started seeing her sister's reflection in the mirror during the day. Terrified and desperate, she finally sought out a therapist because the hallucinations were completely taking over her life. Before getting help, she had scoured the internet, devoured books, and even turned to superstition. Worst of all, she didn't dare tell her loved ones. She was terrified they wouldn't believe her, or worse, write her off as insane. In the world of therapy, this actually isn't an uncommon case. It was a classic example of her subconscious mind using self-suggestion as a coping mechanism. There's a saying in psychology, all psychological issues are, at their root, issues of the subconscious. If everyday people saw a woman talking to a mirror like that, her expression shifting from laughing to crying in a split second, they would assume she was crazy and steer clear. But that lack of understanding only makes a patient suppress their feelings even more. The more they suppress it, the worse the condition gets, leading to social isolation and a vicious downward spiral. Yet, the cure for this patient was surprisingly simple and elegant. First, the therapist used exposure therapy, having her interact with her sister's old belongings to reaffirm her own independent identity. Then, using hypnotherapy, the therapist allowed her to fully release her repressed grief. Finally, they came up with a brilliant, quirky exercise. They told her to regularly pop pimples in front of the mirror. Why? Because during that process, she was forced to look at her face from mere inches away. It forced her to look past the resemblance to her sister and focus on the unique, unmistakable traits of her own face. And just like that, the problem was solved. Honestly, it wasn't that the therapist's technique was some medical miracle. It was that the condition itself wasn't as terrifying as we make it out to be. Just like the woman in that case, we all have those moments where what we obsess over by day haunts our dreams by night. We all have moments where we suddenly don't feel like ourselves, but rather like someone else entirely. It's just the subconscious blowing off steam. It's completely normal. On the milder end of the spectrum, some people completely change personality after a few drinks. Their Dr. Banner before the alcohol, but turn into the Hulk after. Some women are perfectly polite and reserved in their daily lives, but once they hit a nightclub, they let loose, dancing wildly as if they've been completely reborn. On the deeper end, you have men who secretly enjoy putting on their wives' clothes at home and mimicking a soft, feminine voice. Even if their wives find out, they usually laugh it off as a joke rather than labeling them with transvestic disorder. Or take someone who is otherwise kind and upstanding, yet when they catch a rat, they torture it with shocking cruelty. The former might not mind being caught by close family, while the latter would take that secret to the grave. These are all minor manifestations of abnormal psychology, simple, real, incredibly common, and happening all around us. It happens to you, to me, to everyone. Being abnormal is really that simple. Everyone has a twisted side to them, just as naturally as a sunny day creates a dark shadow, or a calm lake reflects an upside-down world. Because it's so common, we simply choose to ignore it. The real question is, which one is the actual reflection, the you in the mirror, or the you in reality? Are you truly sure? The extreme contradictions of a child of darkness. Let's look at a specific case. And notice I say case, not patient, because this individual was ultimately found fully competent to stand trial. He had no neurological defects or clinical psychosis. If there was anything abnormal about him, it was purely his actions. The subject of this case was a young man in his early 20s, went by the name Jack. He came from a wealthy family, excelled in school, and never showed a single red flag in his everyday social life. According to the investigation, his roommates just thought he was a bit of a rigid idealist. He had an incredibly intense sense of justice compared to the average person. Whenever he read about someone being treated unfairly in the news, he would get visibly furious, declaring that if he ever had the power, he would use any means necessary to protect the weak. Yet, this exact same young man ended up murdering 2 homeless women with whom he had absolutely no connection. He was caught only when he stumbled while hunting for a third target, leading a bystander to call the police. Jack didn't try to hide what he did. When asked why, he traced it back to the intense resentment he felt after his girlfriend broke up with him. On the surface, when she called it quits, Jack acted incredibly mature and understanding, even giving her a parting gift. But beneath that mask, he went out and took all that hidden rage out on total strangers. The psychologist who evaluated him noted that the most striking part of the case was the trigger itself. Jack's ex-girlfriend was completely unharmed, aside from being deeply shaken once the truth came out. This shows that Jack's actions were a violent rebellion against his own established personality and values. Outside of his daily routine, he had constructed an alternate persona and an alternate life. This shadow self was the exact opposite of the righteous good guy he played in public, which is precisely why he targeted strangers. It allowed him to keep looking like a saint to everyone who actually knew him. It's worth noting that Jack grew up in a single-parent household. His father was a businessman who doted on him financially but only spent about 3 days a month with him during his childhood, and even less as he got older. That profound lack of a father figure left Jack feeling deeply helpless and abandoned. To compensate for that childhood trauma, Jack chased absolute perfection in his later life, succeeding in school, his career, wealth, and romance. But in a life built like a house of cards, the moment one piece shifted, the moment he tasted rejection and failure, he was instantly dragged back into the shadows of his childhood. In other words, it's the butterfly effect in human form. A father doesn't spend enough time with his young son, and over a decade later, 2 innocent women pay for it with their lives. From this case, we can see the common thread that runs through the darker corners of the human mind. Whether we realize it or not, our shadow traits always leave a paper trail in our daily lives. If you know how to look, you can catch glimpses of a person's alternate face in the tiniest details. This sounds like old-school intuition, but modern psychology has turned it into a science. Today, professionals can analyze a person's handwriting, the speed of their speech, their nervous tics, or even how they react to stepping in dog poop, whether they scream or quietly wipe it away, to map out a personality, or, more accurately, to map out a person's multiple personalities. Because of his father's neglect, Jack subconsciously defined his younger self as the helpless victim. His subconscious created a defense mechanism: I must protect the weak. This is why he displayed such an intense sense of justice in his daily life. However, an obsessive, rigid sense of justice isn't always a good thing. If a person harbors deep resentment toward reality, or turns that judgment inward after a failure, things go south quickly. That's what happened to Jack. His acquaintances later provided a telling clue. Jack had a bizarre, borderline obsessive hatred for the pigeons in the public square. He called them parasites and had actively tried to poison them. As his psychologist put it, he used extreme righteousness to deny his childhood trauma, and then used extreme violence to destroy his own righteousness. It was a massive, walking contradiction. It's also clear that after experiencing a crushing blow to his ego, he looked for an outlet to vent, and ultimately let his inner child of darkness take the wheel. The human body and mind both have built-in survival mechanisms. You can't choke yourself to death because your body's primal survival instinct will override your actions. Similarly, when people experience massive emotional trauma, the brain sometimes triggers selective amnesia, a shocking protective shield. Just think, if Jack had been able to confront and accept the shadow self hiding inside him, if he had found a healthy way to process his dark emotions, things would never have ended this way. The common denominator in all abnormal psychology is this: dark thoughts harbored in daily life eventually snowball into massive, destructive energy. When we refuse to look at the shadows lurking beneath the surface, that's when people lose their minds. It brings to mind that famous phrase, "Ideas are the most dangerous things in the world." Is the man wearing a dress on the street a freak? Is the woman talking to her dead sister in the mirror crazy? Is Jack, the guy who murdered strangers, a born monster? The answers might surprise you. The therapist's cure for that grieving sister was so simple it's almost hard to believe, just having her pop pimples in front of a mirror to see the unique reality of her own face. Her condition wasn't a monster, it was just her subconscious crying out because she missed her twin. And Jack's tragedy, while sparked by the absence of his father, ultimately came down to his inability to face his own shadow. He used a mask of perfect justice to bury his trauma until the repressed negativity swallowed him whole. The warning signs were there, like his bizarre urge to poison the pigeons in the park, but everyone ignored them. The people we call abnormal usually aren't monsters at all, they are just ordinary people who never learned how to deal with their own darkness. Like we said, ideas are the most dangerous things in the world. The only difference between you and them is whether you have the courage to look your shadow self in the eye, which one is the reflection, and which one is real. Are you truly sure? Facing the shadows within us is the only way we can truly step into the light. May we all have the courage to meet the stranger living inside our own minds. Thanks for listening to Mind and Meaning. We'll see you next time.